Well, many of you know that for about the last 40 years, I've been sitting in the back pew regularly. And this being here reminds me of the first day of becoming a teacher. After being the student for about 15 years, you're suddenly on the other side of the desk. So thank you all for coming. And this is my story of a close call and a wake-up call. A few winters ago, my husband Tim and I were reveling in our midwinter escape to the Florida coast. We had been walking the beach amidst the crowds of other snowbirds, and we're slowly making our way past the umbrellas and food vendors on our way back to the parking lot. Oh my God, no, don't you see that but for the grace of God, it could be you. It could be you. Those words were only screaming in my head. Not a sound came from my mouth, except the automatic groan that came from my stomach, much like I had been sucker punched. But that low sound had been heard by the 2 prison guards and their 2 inmates. When one of the prisoners looked my way, a guard instantly rapped his hand with his stick. You see, we were in the shadows of an alleyway behind a ritzy resort hotel, and the shackled men were sorting through a very large trash can of putrid garbage, pulling out who knows what. Why? What was so desperately needing to be retrieved? I didn't see anything resembling silver cutlery, maybe just plastic forks and spoons. Why was this repulsive punishment being meted out in public view? How would you answer that? Did the words degradation or humiliation or revenge come to mind? Now, you know, of course, that I was not screaming at the prisoners, but at the prison guards. How could you? What in your life saved you from a similar fate, allowed you to wield such power over another's daily existence? I'm wondering if you have pictured this scenario to its fullest. Did you see 4 men, 2 in crisp blue uniforms with holsters and guns, and 2 in prison garb? Can you imagine the stench of rotten fish in the garbage barrels? My shock of coming upon the scene overrode all other recollections, except for the horror of coming face to face with such degradation and dehumanization in progress. Not here, oh no. Surely Americans are better than this. This was the close call, as I have dubbed it. Why a close call? If I had voiced my thoughts, who knows what ruckus might have ensued and what might the put upon officers of the law have done to their charges, or to me, or to the assembled onlookers. This incident took less than the time it took for Tim and me to take 3 steps and be out of there. But it triggered anger, disgust, a sense of impotency, and sadness in many returning ruminations on my part. Man's inhumanity to man was foremost, as it is with many people, when we are made aware of all sorts of atrocities. near and far, and rather near. Robert Burns followed that line with the words, "Man's inhumanity to man makes countless thousands mourn." We mourn so much about the present, the past, and the future. Will it ever be otherwise? I have lived a long life with my awareness of all the ills of society and the incomprehensible evils mankind perpetrates against his own fellows. My understandings of root causes and effects have been honed by the study of history, as they have been for all of you. But nothing jolts one's consciousness so strongly as a face-to-face encounter with a dehumanizing act in progress. My pity and sorrow for the prisoners. Remember, this was a scalding, hot, sunny day in a spot away from the ocean breeze. My visceral reaction was also blended with pity and a measure of empathy for the guards, even though they were the initial targets of my anger. It must have been an embarrassing and degrading assignment for them as well, for which they had to steel themselves, either through training or stoicism. I thought of my son, who once aspired to being a security guard. What would such a job as that have done to him? Perhaps you've heard personally, as I have, from a corrections officer or two, that the job changed their attitudes and nature, and not always for the better, because of the daily facing and dealing with the anger and meanness and hatred of those incarcerated. This close call was not on the same level of drama as a near-miss car accident or the escape from a burning building or being saved from some dreaded fate. But just as those might be the cause of some existential shakeup, mine was also. I began to recall all the poems and novels and movies, such as Edwin Markham's A Man with a Hoe, John McCrae's In Flanders Fields, Laura Hildebrand's novel that inspired the movie Unbroken, photojournalists' exposés of My Lai, Abu Ghraib, mass grave sites, extermination camps, internment camps, refugee camps, sex slave gulags, barrios, ghettos, a continuous, ever-expanding archive of indictments. This endless litany of crimes and horrors poured through my mind and still pour through my mind with the maddening speed of Billy Joel's song, "We Didn't Start the Fire." Remember that one? We didn't start the fire. It was always burning since the world's been turning. No, we didn't light it, but we tried to fight it. Actually, the current lament for me began in grade school, sometime in the early 1950s. Our classes were shown black and white newsreels, a technological treat back then, of two historical events of which no written text would ever so widely or vividly convey the facts. One was of the gas chambers and the skeletal walking dead on the day of liberation from Auschwitz. The other was the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, graphically showing the scarred and maimed survivors. Excuse me. The teacher in me wonders what the stated lesson objective was for showing us such graphic pictures. Was watching those newsreels intended for the common good? Was it good for me? Henry David Thoreau once penned, "It's not what you look at that matters, it's what you see." I guess the takeaway for me was a lasting sensitivity, a sensitivity to the nuances of the debate about good and evil, right and wrong, and the question, is there a better way? In this case, I'm going to go with the Roman statesman Cicero and say those newsreels underscored his words. To not know what happened before you were born is to forever remain a child. I know that this audience is well-read and tuned in and contemplative, that the theme of degradation and dehumanization and demonizing without remorse is old news to you. I venture to say that the search for a fix has been one of the impetuses in every decent soul throughout human existence. Whereas Robert Burns subtitled his poem about a man's inhumanity to man, a dirge, and concluded that death was the relief and comfort for those who mourn, Hillebrand subtitled her memoir of Louis Zamperini, a story of survival, resistance, resilience, and redemption. The hero of the movie Unbroken epitomized those incredible humans everywhere who are capable of surviving terrible hardships. But why? Why, I ask you, why do they have to survive the kind of tortures dreamt up by other humans? Why do countless thousands need to mourn or be forced to struggle to overcome the unthinkable? A friend recently reminded me that we humans have merely adopted and adapted the same means to destroy our own kind as exists in the plant and animal kingdoms. But we alone have the unique capacity to cease and desist and to choose a better pathway. Our 20th and 21st centuries have not been lacking in efforts to mitigate or solve the multitude of underlying systemic causes of misery, to find an antidote to the madness. We've had our think tanks, focus groups, sit-ins, love-ins, boycotts, marches, Save the Children, War on Drugs, Occupy Wall Street, Live Aid concerts, rallies, campaigns, movements, protests. Yes, yes, all wonderful. Empowering, productive, all sincere, concerted Herculean efforts. The will for action endures. And yet, I hope you sense and even share my despair and my frustration, my sadness. What will it take? What is it going to take? Søren Kierkegaard, the 19th century Danish theologian, said, "Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." I don't have answers, only hopes. As did everyone in all the above-mentioned initiatives. One of my hopes is that in the coming changes in education and curricula, necessitated by the rapidity of technology and scientific discovery, more humanitarianism might supplement the humanities. Even in childhood, almost everyone is touched by or poisoned by the us against them or the me before you attitudes, which stymie concern and care for others. Can our inherent reason and compassion be nurtured to the fullest? Can we honor and admire each measure of kindness as it is offered to another? One recent example of human connectedness is encouraging, it seems. It seems some teen computer geeks whose school was in the same neighborhood as a senior citizen housing complex began answering requests to help the residents with their cell phones and iPads. Those kids visited so often, repeating the same instructions over and over to the same old fogies, that before long, they were best friends and adopted grandkids. The teens began to visit individually rather than as a team. And the wonderful warmth of community made for real face time for both generations and smiles all around. Or again, perhaps you've heard of or known someone who is facing a life-threatening illness or suffered a maiming, disabling accident, who makes themselves a promise that if they are given a second chance at life, they resolve to do more for others, to turn their focus away from themselves and towards someone else's plight and struggle. This becomes their raison d'etre, their reason to be from then on. And this turning their soul inside out gives them joy. It sounds counterintuitive, but in thinking less of their own distress, they in fact lessen the harmful toxins stressing their own bodies, and healing of the body as well as the mind occurs. Without naming names, I know this principle of altruism is and has been practiced in some lives right here in this community. Individual kindnesses done for one another can generate a lifestyle of generosity and philanthropy. We know we have many community servants locally, organizations that do have empathy for the struggles of others, selflessly giving joy and hope to those who can no longer do even mundane tasks for themselves. Personally, helping out gives a life-affirming dividend and has a reciprocal two-way bonus. I've been doing elder care visits on my own for many years, and am so happy to hear that we have an opportunity being presented later in the social room, I was told, for doing just this through the Friendship Volunteer Program. Going back to the inner teacher in me, you may call me crazy or a Pollyanna, but my fervent wish is that schools everywhere will turn out throngs of citizens who have majored in altruism, as it were. Would that they be resilient and numerous enough to go around for all the isolated and broken and traumatized people in our midst. And finally, may this caring for others mindset or pathway for a better future begin in every child's home. When will it be that parents no longer say, "Go make something of yourself," as in fame or fortune? Instead, they will say, "Go make something of someone else. Lift them up. Help them lift their heads. Make them want to live just like you do." So may it be. Amen.